After Cubans had been fighting Spain for their independence for 30 years, the United States found a reason to intervene. In February 1898, after the destruction of the USS Maine, the government of the United States declared war on Spain. The War of 1898 ended Spanish influence in the Western Hemisphere and gave the United States control over its first 3 colonies. Part of the spoils of war came in the form of control over the island of Puerto Rico. As the cost for continuing a military government on the island became increasingly expensive, the need for a stable and democratic government became apparent. Having never controlled a colony before, any new legislation would set a precedent in U.S. policy toward governing another territory. With this in mind, Congress knew that it had to act quickly in order to stabilize the island without bankrupting the country. The Foraker Act of 1900 effectively established the territory of Puerto Rico as a protectorate of the United States, set up a formal structure of government, and placed Puerto Rico on a trade level equal to that of the other states in the Union. Since being put into effect, the act has been amended twice, and its legacy continues to affect the island today. Be it enacted by the Senate and the House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled that the provisions of this act shall apply to the island of Puerto Rico, to the adjacent islands and waters of the island, lying east of the 74th meridian of longitude, west of Greenwich, which were ceded to the United States by the government of Spain by treaty entered into on the 10th day of December, 1898.
The Foraker Act, also known as the Organic Act of 1900, gave the island of Puerto Rico independence and granted Puerto Rican inhabitants their citizenship to the island. Named after its sponsor, Ohio Senator Joseph B. Foraker, the act established San Juan as the capital of Puerto Rico and laid the foundation for the structure of the government. Puerto Rico's government was modeled directly after that of the United States, including an appointed governor as the chief executive of the island. This governor was an American appointed by the United States until 1948, at which point the citizens of Puerto Rico were entitled to elect their own governor. Additionally, a legislative assembly was to act as the equivalent of Congress on the island. This assembly was made up of 2 bodies, the House of Delegates and the Executive Council. While the House of Delegates was elected by popular vote, the governor, the Executive Council, and the Supreme Court were all appointed by the President of the United States. 5 of the 11 members of the council had to be native-born Puerto Ricans, thus always leaving an American majority. In keeping with the American style of government, the governor was to serve a 4-year term and had the ability to veto any legislation enacted by the Assembly. The Assembly, in turn, held the power to override that veto. The Foraker Act granted new structure to the judiciary form of the island of Puerto Rico. By using the court system already put into place by the military occupation and applying United States federal laws, the Supreme Court of Puerto Rico was constructed. The act also granted a sense of representation to Puerto Rican citizens in the United States Congress. The non-voting member of Congress, the resident commissioner, represented by Puerto Rico, but lacked the power of a vote and had no true say in the body of Congress. Although his opinions were always taken into account on matters pertaining to the island, his lack of voting rights meant that his only real hope of forcing change was persuading the other members of Congress. The resident commissioner was in many ways the embodiment of U.S. feelings toward Puerto Rican independence. By refusing to give him a vote, it was clear to see that the U.S. government did not have faith in the Puerto Ricans to make decisions for themselves. At no point in any of the government responsibilities held by Puerto Ricans did they have a say that could not be overturned by the United States. That there shall be appointed by the President, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, for the period of 4 years, a Secretary, an Attorney General, a Treasurer, an Auditor, a Commissioner of the Interior, and a Commissioner of Education, each of whom will have the powers and duties hereinafter provided for them, respectively, and who, together with 5 other persons of good repute, shall constitute an Executive Council, at least 5 of whom shall be native inhabitants of Puerto Rico.
While Puerto Rico gained a new legislative structure, the United States Congress reserved the power to annul or overturn any legislative action by Puerto Rico. The 11 members of the Executive Council and the Puerto Rican governor all served at the pleasure of the President. This meant that each member of the Executive Council was beneath or subordinate to the whims of the President, and could without reasonable cause be replaced at any time if they so displeased him. Operating under this knowledge, members of Puerto Rico's legislative bodies had their hands tied in terms of their ability to force change. While on one side their responsibility was to the people who elected them, They always had to be mindful of not raising too much negative attention for fear of being replaced. Without any kind of job security, it was almost impossible for these men to stand up against unfair legislation. And thereupon, all tariff duties on merchandise and articles going into Puerto Rico from the United States or coming into the United States from Puerto Rico shall cease. The United States had a large economic interest in Puerto Rico as well, as the island had a valuable stock of natural resources and a functioning economic system that relied heavily on exports. It was imperative to the United States to lift trade duties that previously existed between the U.S. and Puerto Rico, and that with respect to interstate trade, Puerto Rico became equal to the states of the Union. In effect, Puerto Rico continued to exist in a colonial economic model as it had under Spain, relying on heavy exportation of simple goods while importing complex produced goods from the United States and the Western world. Because of the economic policies implemented by the United States, Puerto Rican independence today would take a lot more than just a formal written document. Puerto Rico's economy is based solely on exporting to the United States, and this precedence is over that of producing for the good of the island. Because of this, Puerto Rico would not be able to support itself as an independent nation overnight. Any true hope for independence must first look at reversing the economic policies first implemented by the Foraker Act. Section 11 of the Foraker Act officially changed the Puerto Rican currency to the US dollar. This is another example of yet another obstacle on the path of independence brought on by the Foraker Act. Along with the change in currency, the United States implemented a change in the language of Puerto Rico from Spanish to English. All court rulings and legal meetings were held in English, as well as courses in public schools. The Spanish language was treated as a specialized subject. As Puerto Rico came under the power of the United States, the U.S. realm of control in the Western Hemisphere continued to expand. Along with the simple action of taking control over a former country's land, the U.S. also exercised imperialist actions by changing the official language, altering the culture, and slightly restricting the potential freedoms and rights of Puerto Ricans. The importance of Puerto Rico's trade relationship with the United States would become a model upon the U.S. market throughout the 20th century. The legacy of the Foraker Act has in some ways been eclipsed by the Jones-Shafroth Act of 1917. In response to pressures on the island, the Jones-Shafroth Act granted U.S. citizenship for all citizens of Puerto Rico. Along the passing of this legislation came the focal point of discussions about Puerto Rico today. It would have been impossible without the groundwork laid by the Foraker Act. The first ever Organic Act was also the foundation for the second Organic Act that established the governing structure for the Philippines. A century after it was signed into law, the Foraker Act and its ramifications are still present in Puerto Rico today. Current debates about the island and the future of its government have their roots in the Foraker Act and how its legacy is being interpreted today. Be it economic, political, or social, the legacy left by the Foraker Act is the key to the future of the island and the people who call it home.